Is this like the color that I would gravitate towards normally? Not so much. However, none of this makes any sense to me. I don't know where things were going wrong. You can't even say, oh my gosh, this is my favorite thing I've ever knit. It's just a basic tank top. Do I frog? Do I start over? What do I do? Help. Whoa. So I have no idea what's happening here, but I really don't care because it's working out.
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora Knits.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for another podcast episode today. I am very happy to be sitting here and taking a minute to shut out the rest of the world and just talk about knitting. If you're new here, like I said, I am Nora. I'm coming to you from a small farm in Connecticut. And depending on where you are, you may have seen on the news that Connecticut has had some really intense weather and flooding over the past week. So my schedule has just kind of been flipped upside down, and it does feel really good to just take a minute and, like I said, pretend everything out there is just not happening and just focus on the knitting. And I also thought maybe today we'll see, just chat a little bit about like the effects of that the outside world can kind of have on my knitting and the way that it sort of got me in and out of some just, weird times this week. So those of you who have asked, we are safe, we are good. And it's just been a really interesting week to watch all of this unfold. So I don't want to get too much into it. I just like to keep this channel as my happy space, and hopefully you feel the same way. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And so I think that without further ado, we should just go ahead and dive on in. Now, if you have been here before, you may or may not have already noticed that I am indeed wearing a finished object today, and I have some feelings about it. I feel like I have to sort of refresh myself on where we were last week, which I believe was that this was fresh off of the blocking mats and was just waiting to address some of the finishings here. So let's chat about that. This is my Tolsta tank by the Crayabea Rebecca Clow, and it is the DK weight version. I have knit mine with a combination of the cami neckline as well as the back of the vest neckline. And I've made some modifications, mostly the fact that to cast on, it's a bottom-up knit, and it is intended to have some ribbing at the hem. However, I omitted that and just did your standard long tail cast on and just started knitting up. And when I reached the underarm and split for the front and the back, I knit the back, which you're seeing right now, as the vest back, and then the front as the cami front. Now, the cami is intended to have just the slipped edge finishes on it. So it's a raw hem or a raw edge. There isn't meant to be anything like applied additionally after that. Whereas for the vest version, you are supposed to go back and add a ribbing to all of those finishes. And being that I was borrowing from different parts of the pattern, I was left with a sort of awkward in between of what should I do to complete this project. And basically what I wound up settling on was that I felt like everything did need to be resolved a little bit, specifically for the back edge, which again, you are looking at right now. And so I had toyed around with a few different options of I-cords and things like that. And in the end, went with the 2-stitch I-cord that is used on the front of the Claire vest by Mochi Knits to complete all of the finishes. Now, as you're seeing it on me today, I have not actually gone and blocked this any further. And I'm not 100% satisfied with it, but I'm also ready to put it away for this season. So we're calling it done, but there are a few things that are just not quite right and maybe could be resolved with blocking. But it was just one of those things. I felt like this was as far as I wanted to take this year or this season right now. And I'm actually happier now sitting in it than I was when I finished the knitting on it a few days ago. So for all of these reasons, there are some ends that are not woven in. The full garment was blocked, but has not been blocked since I completed the I-cords that I had done. And I think at this point in time, it's mostly only wearable in the reverse, which was my plan all along, was to have a sort of cami top that was bra strap friendly, that I could have two different versions of. So I could wear it with a V-neck in the front, or I could have something with more of a high neck. Now, I think that in a pleasant turn of events, I would almost say that if you are looking for a sort of like boat neck version of a cami, you could probably consider this to be the fourth neckline option in the Tolsta pattern. So Rebecca Claus' whole shtick is that she always includes so many different options for personalizing her different patterns, which is something that I really, really appreciate about what she does. And specifically when it comes to something like a basic tank, I really loved the idea that it came with a V-neck, a crew neck, and a square neck. And I think that if you are someone who doesn't want the full kind of tight crew neck, if you like this look, I think you could get it by just knitting the back of that vest on both sides. You know, if you want the whole thing to kind of have the boat neck. I personally think that this is really, really flattering. I mean, for me, I enjoy this neckline a lot. And I think that the way that it's done, since it is intended to be the back of a garment, it does have that sort of trendy where like kind of coming in here that I've seen on a lot of necklines of camis and stuff, but oftentimes they kind of dip too far in and you wind up seeing a bit of strap or something. Whereas because this is supposed to be the back, it's really nice and wide set. So I feel totally covered and comfortable up here. And I'm really enjoying the neckline on this side. Now, where I went wrong is that with the 2-stitch I-cord, I basically had taken one day to do one armhole and then waited a few days. And on the same day, I had done the neck and the other armhole. And I should have done the two armholes on the same day and then maybe the neckline on a different day, because my tension is crazy different from one armhole to the other. And it's significant enough that this one is just a little bit too snug. And then this one is kind of just right, if not maybe a little bit loose. And then the way that I had done the neckline on the V-neck in particular, it's very snug. So much so that when I wear this sort of right way, the V-neck is at that kind of awkward in between where it's not having the effect that I had hoped it would. You know, I kind of was hoping for like a date night versus work tank. So this being the work side and then the V-neck being the date night side. So I really did want something that was quite deep without showing anything. And I think that doing the I-cord edge, it just sort of like sucked it up and it's just in an awkward point. So for now, I think I'll stick to wearing it this way if I choose to wear this over the next few weeks and the rest of the warm season that we have. But I think it's something I'll have to revisit later on. All of that being said, let me run you down real quick the size and things that I knit this in. So in the end, I wound up knitting this garment in the size 4. I used 4.5 millimeter needles the whole way, and I knit mine up in a mercerized cotton yarn that I can't find anywhere. I thrifted it, but it's a mercerized cotton. I do feel like, so the pattern calls for a 5 millimeter needle, and I did my gauge swatch with that and everything, and found that the fabric was a bit too gapey for my liking, especially because it is that mercerized cotton. It's not doing a lot of plumping up in blocking. And I do think that having it on right now, it's cotton, so I imagine it's going to stretch out a little bit, but I feel like the way that it's kind of pulling over the bust, it winds up being a little bit more see-through still than I would have liked it to be. I don't think that it's the end of the world, but it is something that I'm like, I should have maybe just gone to a 4 millimeter needle instead. But I didn't realize it was going to be quite that significant. So that's a little bit of a bummer there. I did the finishes of the I cords on a 3.5 millimeter needle. And again, that was a 2-stitch I cord that I borrowed from the Mochi Knits pattern. I think it's an appropriate proportion for the finishes. I just think that maybe I should have picked up more stitches. I think I picked up all of the stitches though. So either picked up more stitches or maybe just used a bigger needle size because I wound up just getting too much cinching, or just being more cognizant of the tension. Like I said, I did the same exact thing on this side versus this side as far as stitches picked up and the needle size and all of that, but one of them is significantly looser, and that was just the tension thing. So a tip is, if you're doing something like this, especially with an I cord where you really can kind of finesse the tension of that just based on like how high you're pulling up your loops when you are knitting that and then slipping things back. Try to do all of those finishes maybe in the same day so you stay as consistent as possible, because it just makes all the difference. So that was just kind of the one really frustrating thing. The other thing is that because the cami side is supposed to have the slip stitch edge, it does. And I perhaps should have thought ahead a little bit and should not have done the slipped stitch edge, because it creates the like elongated stitches along all of the edges, which is what makes it look a little bit more tidy in the end. But then when you're picking up the stitches, it creates that sort of, it creates a little bit of an awkward look and situation. So if you're planning to do something like I had done with this Tolsta and mix and match some of the necklines, I would maybe consider beforehand, are you planning to do any edges, any finishing of the edges? And if so, maybe just omit that slip stitch and just knit that as per usual, the same way that you do on the sides that are intended to then have stitches picked up and knit. So that's just something that a little forethought could have gone a long way. And yeah, I originally had knit this in the size 4 with the bust shaping for the smaller bust shaping, and found that it was too big and it was creating a lot of awkward fabric up here. And having reknit it in without the bust shaping, I feel like that definitely is the right size for me. I really enjoy the amount of ease I'm getting on this. I think it's about 0 ease in the bust and then just enough in the body that it's nice and comfortable. And yeah, we'll see how much wear I get out of this, especially once I actually get around to perfecting all of those little things. But for now, I think it's just the color for me that I'm so in love with this one. And so I'm very happy to have it on right now in the way that it's suitable. And I think that if it's obvious that these armholes are not doing quite what they're supposed to, I should probably go through and at least give it like a steam block, maybe try to stretch this one out. And then worst case scenario, I could at least wear it for now with a blazer over the top if I'm just feeling a little self-conscious about the way the rest of it looks. But I do think it's really cute. So I'm happy to call it done for right now. That being said, let's run through the stats for this project. As per usual, I'll just be reading off of my iPad to make this a little bit easier. So like I said, this is the Tolsta tank. The designer is Rebecca Clow. The pattern price I actually got at a discounted price because I had applied to test knit this pattern and was not accepted. But Rebecca gives a discount to anyone who applies to test her patterns. So that was really nice. Turns out that I wound up spending $6.22 on this pattern, which of all of the patterns that I could see I've bought this year, this was one of the cheapest. So it was not in my pattern library. I did purchase it specifically to knit this pattern, and it was not gifted. The yarn that I use, like I said, it's a discontinued yarn. I have not been able to find it literally anywhere on the internet. The brand is called Wool Service, and it is the Alina sort of like type of that brand's yarn, which is a mercerized cotton. It's the colorway 453. And I had purchased this, like I said, at a thrift store. So I bought it when I saw that Rebecca Clow was going to be announcing testing for this pattern. And I knew immediately I would be using it for the Tolsta. But technically it was in my stash. So I'm trying to make sure I stay kind of clear with when I talk about things that were in my stash versus yarn that I bought specifically to knit a pattern. So in this situation, it was a case of this yarn was purchased to knit this pattern. However, I had purchased it sat in my stash for a while, and then when it came time to knit it, I grabbed the yarn from my stash and started knitting. Whereas what I would consider now something that was not in my stash would be like, today I'm deciding I'd like to knit something, so I have to go buy some yarn and find it to make it. I hope that kind of makes sense. I want to try and differentiate that a little bit more because it seems as though I've not been working from my stash when I have, in fact. It's just been kind of like a little bit backwards. So I'll be considering from now on something in stash if it was sitting in my stash when I went to go knit the pattern, and I was, even if it was purchased to knit this specifically, it was already in my stash. I had already bought that yarn. Whereas if I am going out and actively like ignoring what I already own and purchasing yarn to knit something, that's what I'll say. It's not in my stash. So I just wanted to clear that up because I think I got things a little bit mixed up in my last finished object. So because I haven't been able to find this yarn anywhere on the internet, I based the sort of full price per skein off of some similar yarns, other yarns from this brand, and guesstimated that per ball of yarn, it would be about $6 full price. However, because I thrifted this yarn, I purchased it for $1 a ball. Now, I wound up tapping into a total of 6 balls to knit this pattern. However, I think that includes a bit of waste, and I believe that the finished object is really more like 5 balls and a quarter of another. So I probably even could have gotten away without using that additional quarter if I, kind of omitted a little bit of the body. So if you're looking for yarn quantities, but overall I did tap into 6 50-gram balls of this yarn, which means that had I purchased the yarn at full price, it would have cost about $36 for the project. However, because I thrifted this yarn, I only spent $6 on the yarn for this project. There were no additional expenses, and so had I purchased the yarn at full price, my total for the whole project would have been $42.22. However, because I thrifted the yarn, my project total, so yarn plus pattern, was $12.22, and it spent a total of 47 days on the needles. Overall, I can definitely justify those little things that are not as perfect as I wish that they were because of the final price tag on this project and the fact that it was a fairly mindless knit while it was mindless. And so I'm happy to have it. And again, it's just the color. I just love the color of it. So yeah, I think that that's all I have to say about my Tolsta. I I enjoy the knitting experience, and I feel like it's just a very no frills. It's a good basic pattern to have in your library if you're looking for that. So I feel like you can't even say, oh my gosh, this is my favorite thing I've ever knit. It's just a basic tank top. But it is really nice to just have, especially the bottom up construction makes for some really nice, just easy knitting in the round until you get to the underarms, and then the rest really does fly by. So yeah, I'm happy with it. In the end, I am very pleased with what I've got going on, despite the many challenges this project had. And more than anything, right now, I'm happy to say that it's just done. So that is my finished object, the Tolsta tank. Now, I do have another Tolsta tank on the needles, but we're actually just going to breeze right past it this week because I have not touched it even a little bit. So we'll just move on to that maybe next week. And next up, I'm going to also go out of order a little bit. So the reason that hasn't gotten worked on is because I have been working on another garment as my main mindless in the round knitting. And that is my Cordelia skirt by Witchery Design. This is a midi length skirt that is part of a set. It also has a matching vest top that I'm hoping to get to this year. But for now, I'm working on this long striped tube of a skirt. And I have been working this project up in Drops Belle in the colorways Mint Cream and Black. And the project has been on my needles for 14 days today. So here we have it. I am knitting this skirt up in the size extra large, and I have dropped down the needle size. The recommended needle size as a 4mm needle, and I'm using a 3.75mm needle. I did that just because I found that the gauge was a little bit gapy for me in my swatch, and being that it is a skirt, I just wanted to kind of snug that up a little bit. But here we have it. Actually, I'd like to try something. Let me hang this up. All right, I don't know how much better that is, but we have Miss Helena the hanger here. And it actually has these little clips on it. So I thought maybe this would help to be able to visualize this a little bit better. But you do cast this on and knit through some increases to sort of work from the waist out to the hips. And that was exactly where I was last week. And since then, I have worked a good few inches. I have my progress keeper right over here, and I have done 1, 2, 3, 4 black stripes or 4 contrast stripes since last week. And truly, this has just been my mindless knitting. I've been really enjoying it for that. What's really fun in particular about knitting stripes is that sort of constant desire to get to the next one. If you've never knit stripes, I'm sure that you've heard other people talk about this. And it is funny how there is this sort of just sensation of like, oh, maybe I'll just go one more. Well, I don't want to leave that stripe unfinished, so maybe I should just knit to the end of the stripe. And it's the sort of constant just one more mentality that causes stripes, I feel like, to just knit up so much faster. It's also pretty satisfying to see the tangible growth of the stripes and be able to say, oh, I've knit this many stripes over the past week. So there's something fun about that. And honestly, it's just been nice to have a mindless garment that I'm really excited to have off the needles in my wardrobe too. So this is both very process, very product. It's a really perfect sort of marriage of all of the best parts of knitting for me right now. Something that makes this pattern in particular that much more engaging is the fact that for every black stripe that you see, there's one purl row in that black stripe that really does give this fabric a really luxe sort of texture. And it's just that other thing like, oh, let me just knit up to the purl row. Now, I have been using what I call one of my broke girl hacks to keep track of the stripes. So I have built myself a little row counter out of stitch markers. And the way that I've done this is I have the 6 rows that make up a main color stripe. I have 6 stitch markers. that they go in like a rainbow order so I can count them. And the 6th one is a progress keeper. So it's a little bit more identifiable as the end of the row. And I know I'm always working towards that. And then for the black stripes or the contrast stripes, they're smaller stripes, so I don't use up the entire row counter. However, the last row in those contrast stripes is that pearl row. And so I've strategically done things such that the last row is a pink stitch marker in my row counter. And I know then when I see pink, it's time to purl. And then that's the last row in the contrast stripes. So that's just something I like to do to make this even more mindless than it already is. The other thing I wanted to share today is that in the pattern, she does tell you to just carry your yarn up the inside. And so with each color change, what she advises to do in the pattern is to twist the yarn. So you're just sort of kind of locking it in place. And that's worked out really well for me. Whereas in other striped patterns that I've done, I would just carry the yarn up, but not give it that twist at the color change. And I found that I would get a little bit of a gap in that stitch where all the colors are changing for the stripes. And by doing that twist, it does kind of help. Whoa. It does kind of help to just hold that stitch together so that you don't get any little holes. And yeah, that's what's going on here. This has been on the needles for, did I say already 14 days? And this is maybe where going from this project into the next one, I thought it was really interesting over the week how I would have thought that with a bit of a chaotic week, my mindless knitting would be really like what had my heart. However, I found that it was almost too mindless for me to get lost in it and to escape into it. So it's been really nice when it's just the end of the day and I've felt like I need to just wind down. I've been enjoying this project, or with coffee in the morning, just not really think about it. Having a show on, something I could watch and still knit at the same time. But I have found that over the week, I've been prioritizing the project that is requiring a bit more mindfulness. And it's a nice amount of mindfulness where it's not like overbearing and overwhelming. It's just enough to kind of really keep me focused, because otherwise my mind has just been in a billion places. So I don't know. I just thought I might share that if you're someone who's going through something or just there's a lot going on in your life and you feel like knitting, which might typically be your sort of escape, your sort of release, if it's not giving you what you need, maybe it is time to find something that just has a little bit more thought to it, something that maybe is following a chart or where you do have to actively tick off row by row, because it might just help you stay focused and really stay thinking about the project in your hands and not about every other little thing going on at the moment. So this has been a lovely escape for when I am needing just mindless. But the next project that we're going to talk about is the one that has had me enthralled over the past week. So for now, why don't I go ahead and just measure the progress we've made on here, and I'll move my progress keeper and we'll put this aside till next week. All right, it looks like I've done about 5 inches on this. I also probably around next week, depending what gets done on here, I'll probably want to try this on to see exactly how long it needs to be. I also, something that I had modified about this pattern was that I'm waiting to do the waistband after, maybe not after I finish the rest of the skirt, but I didn't start with that. So I just started with the regular knitting to make sure that the skirt would fit me. And then I'll go back and do the waistband at some point when we're nearing the end. So yeah, that is that on the Cordelia skirt this week. Also, she has graduated to the Black Pearl Magic clear bag. Love this because I can always see what's in here. I can always tell if there's yarn. I kind of try to ball up a few balls of yarn or cake up a few balls of yarn and just keep them on hand. And so if I'm grabbing this to leave the house and I can see that I don't have an additional ball with me, I can quickly cake one up or do whatever I have to do. So I love Shayla's clear bags for that reason. And the final WIP we're going to talk about today is my clematis vest. This is a pattern by Emma Mayer of Emma's Knits. I am knitting mine up in Sandisgarn Lena, also in a black. So there's a theme here. And I'm knitting mine in the size large. Let's throw this on to Helena because this has been a bit of an ordeal over the past week. Okay, I might actually have to put like a t-shirt or something under this because you're definitely not going to be able to see that. Okay, please excuse the wrinkly t-shirt, but that's about the best I could do for right now. So this project had me a bit bewildered last week. However, I turned to the lovely people on Instagram to help me navigate this a little bit. So basically what was happening is you start this project by knitting up the back panel, then in sort of typical fashion, pick up in the fronts and knit your way down until you reach the underarm and you knit down from there. And what I was finding was that my row gauge is wacky on this one. It's not something I'm having a very easy time making sense of. I did my gauge swatch. I had knit up the back panel and blocked it, measured before and after. And what's happening is that this is shrinking in blocking. Where typically you see vertical growth in blocking, it is shrinking a little bit. And I just was having this total mental block of really not wanting the armholes to be too deep here and finding that the measurements I was told to meet in the pattern from the back of the neck down to the underarm, but with the increases for the armhole shaping and all of that, like none of it was working. And last week I was at a point where I reached this sort of pivotal moment where I could have kept going, or I could have ripped back and tried to change things. And it was bothering me enough that I just turned to Instagram and I asked those of you who follow me there, which by the way, it's at AKA Nora Knits, and I'm very grateful for the community that helped me out with this, as well as just all of the things. I tend to post little polls and stuff in my stories over there. So if you're interested in those kind of real-time updates, then that's definitely the place to go. So I posted my dilemma and asked, what should I do? And one person responded with just the most logical solution, which was to leave the back panel where it was. Because I was like, do I frog? Do I start over? What do I do? And so she said, just leave the back panel as it is, pick up for the fronts, knit your way down to the underarms there, and then try it on. And if the armhole is too deep at that point, you could just rip everything back a little bit and solve it then. Which I just thought, like, thank you. That makes so much more sense than me trying to get the numbers on this back panel perfect before moving to the front. And the real reason that this has been just tricky, in addition to the fact that there's that row gauge stipulation going on in before and after blocking, it's also the fact that the coolest part of this pattern is the button placket and the way that it crosses your body. So it's not something that I really wanted to have to put a lot more brain power into. The pattern has already done the work of figuring out how exactly to do this diagonal button placket situation. And I did not want to come in and have to start redoing things. So that was exactly what I did. I picked up for the fronts and knit down to the underarm. Now let's just pause there for a second, because since this does have the diagonal button placket, it is a really interesting construction where you're picking up sort of this little sliver on this side, right? So right here. Oh, yeah, right here. Oh, so it was on this side. I'm looking at the mirrored version. So you pick up this sort of little sliver and you are knitting this side of the front down to the underarm. Then you're picking up on this whole shoulder, as well as another little sliver that gets picked up sort of underneath the other front flap, and joining those together at the neckline, and then knitting that all as one big chunk of the front. It's very fun. It's very interesting. It was very like, okay, do this, gotta increase, gotta decrease, gotta do these things. And I found it to be really fun. Definitely something that you want to just sit down and like focus on doing, but I really enjoyed that. So I knit my way down to the underarms, at which point I tried it on and I said, nope, we better block this again. So I blocked it again, and I'm glad that I did, because at that point, so I had knit down to the underarm and then I did just 2 rounds to join it in the round. You're knitting flat, it's a vest. Joined it, and when I tried it on before blocking, I felt like I was getting a lot of extra fabric, and I mean a lot. So blocked it, came off the blocking mats, and I decided it was, in fact, too much. Too much positive ease, which makes no sense to me, because let me look at the pattern again so I make sure I get this right. But it's intended to have 2 inches of positive ease, and the bust circumference that I am knitting to is a 42-inch bust. That is my accurate bust measurement. And the bust circumference of that vest size is intended to be 44 inches, which would give me 2 inches of positive ease. However, when I tried this on, I must have had 4 inches of positive ease on either side of me. So I have absolutely no idea where things went wrong. My stitch counts were more or less right. I think I was missing a stitch or two, but even that, I was under the stitch count, very confused. I don't know why that was happening. I did jot down that the back panel before blocking was 48 centimeters wide. How many inches is 48 centimeters?
The answer is 18.9 inches.
So Siri here is telling me that that's about 19 inches, which none of this makes any sense to me. I don't know where things were going wrong. I don't know why this was happening, but I felt like the armholes were definitely too big, and I'm glad that I stopped and blocked when I did, because all I did from that point was I pinched the sides and I kind of counted how many stitches do I have within my pinched fabric here. And I counted about 6 stitches deep on either side. So a total of 12 stitches all around on either side. A total of 24 stitches less was what I really felt like I needed in the bust. So I wound up ripping out the rows that I had already joined together, as well as the last 4 rows in each panel. So on each of the fronts, on the back, I ripped back 4 rows. So that meant that the whole thing decreased, because there's a lot of armhole increasing here. And then when it came time to casting on stitches under the arms, I counted the stitches I had left, determined the amount of stitches I wanted total and figured out that I would have to cast on just 2 stitches under each arm. Now, what that means at this point is that my stitch count corresponds to more like a size medium. It's actually very close. So I'm knitting this in the size large, started it that way, and then for the body, I'm working at about a size medium. And it's fitting. So I don't know where things are going awry. I don't know if it's the yarn. I don't know if it's me. My gauge is on gauge, if not a little bit smaller than it's supposed to be. So I have no idea what's happening here, but I really don't care because it's working out. And what do I say all the time? The imperfections are what make something so perfectly handmade. So I really do not mind having to go in and make these changes. And I think if anything, maybe sitting here with both this garment and this garment in front of me, a takeaway that I'd like to say out loud is that with this garment, I'm feeling extremely confident in the progress that I will be making from now on because I've already knit and blocked and knit and blocked and pulled back and knit and tried on. And I've been so particular. Whereas with this, I just knit it through, tried it on, didn't fit, ripped it back, knit it through, did some finishes. It doesn't work. So there's something to be said about just taking the time and investing a little bit more time in making sure things are working out the way that they're supposed to, rather than just getting to the end and discovering that it's not working. All is good. At the moment, just for trying on sake, I had put some stitch markers to kind of help close the button placket a little bit. I also went back and I knitted and I knitted up the ribbing that makes up the neckline because that was also part of my whole, are the armholes too deep, that whole situation. I wanted to make sure I was as accurate as possible. So I do still need to add the ribbing on the armholes, which I'm just going to, again, just be sort of mindful of. The only change that I made in the ribbing for the neck is that I only did 5 rows of ribbing instead of 6. I just felt like with my gauge, I guess, the 6 would have made it a little bit too tall. So I'm very happy with that. And so I think what the plan is right now for this guy, did I see how long it's been on the needles? This one's been on the needles for 16 days, so it's going by pretty quickly. I think that the plan as of right now is to finish up the ball of yarn that I am working from right now, at which point I will jump back to the armholes and get those all settled so that when I'm determining the length for this, everything's feeling as close to accurate as possible. And yeah, I'm just feeling really good about this one. And this is the project that has been such a lovely way to sit down. And it's only mindful because you have to, there's, a pattern repeat for making sure that you're increasing and decreasing across the button placket. And so it's just enough that you're, kind of keeping track of what row you're on. I'm using tallies to do that. And because it's the back and forth, the knitting and purling, I'm just really enjoying this right now. I'm enjoying working with the yarn as well. And on the 4mm needles, it just feels like it's working up very quickly. So I'm in the middle of a ball of yarn right now. When I get to the end of it, I'll go back into the armholes and then we'll see. The only thing that's tricky with adjusting the length on this pattern, and she says this in the pattern, is that you do have to be aware that let's say we cut it as cropped as it is right now, your diagonal does only go to the center. So it's not creating that sort of balance where it goes from kind of skinny to wide to skinny at the other end, or, it kind of flip-flops the balance of the amount of stitches on each side. So just something to keep in mind. There is a sort of goal amount of rows that you want to hit, and that's all in the pattern. And then the only other thing that I wanted to say is that I was fiddling around quite a bit with the different front panels because I actually kept going back and counting my rows. I thought maybe at some point I had knit more rows on the skinny panel than on the wide panel because it was sitting significantly longer on one side than the other. And so I kept looking. I was like, clearly I've done something wrong. But what I've figured out is that it's really just the sort of structural integrity of the skinny front panel side. Because it's all just sort of hanging on by a few stitches at the top, the weight of that side is kind of tugging it down right now. And then the other one is really structurally sound. So it's happy and fine, and it's sitting very, very straight across the way it's supposed to. So I believe that that's all just something that once I go back and do the actual ribbed button placket, that's what's going to help this. This is also a vest that is intended to always be buttoned up at the top. You could kind of leave the bottom open. And the only thing that I'm kind of aware of is that it could very much look like a sort of nursing top, which is great if you need that and you're looking for something that's nursing mama friendly, then this is a great solution. But I think that's just the only thing I'm like, oh, make sure that that it doesn't look like that's its intended purpose because it's not for me. So yeah. And then maybe just one more quick question for this one. I think I will wait till it's closer to being done and I will take it with me to go find buttons. But I'm feeling right now like I either want to go with small shell buttons, so just your typical sort of mother of pearl shiny shell buttons, or I was also thinking little tortoise shell type buttons could be nice because I intend to wear this mostly with my other sort of beiges and stuff. So I don't know, I thought maybe the tortoise shell could kind of warm it up a little bit since it is black. Anyway, really loving this one right now. That is the clematis vest by Emma Mayer of Emma's Knits, and been on the needles for 16 days today. Okay, as that is the end of my WIPs, my finished objects, I do just have one small acquisition. Another one that if you are over on Instagram and follow me there, you may have seen this already. But I found myself in a thrift store last weekend and picked up these two really beautiful skeins of yarn. They are Plymouth Yarn Baby Alpaca Grande, and really, really, oh my gosh, it was just so soft and it was so exciting to find at the thrift store. So it's 100% baby alpaca. And these are the color 1398. So there were two of them there. They were $3 a piece. So I paid $6 for this whole combo. And sometimes when it comes to thrifting yarns, is this like the color that I would gravitate towards normally? Not so much. However, these skeins of yarn, I believe when I looked it up, I think it said that they're about $19 a piece normally. And there's some really compelling colors there. So I thought I could pick these up and always use these for Christmas gifts or, something else giftable or just little accessories. I don't not like this color. It's just maybe not my favorite shade of green. But I thought it would be a really fun opportunity to just play with this yarn a little bit and see how I feel about it for other garments, especially because when I asked on Instagram if you all thought I should pick this up, I got extremely mixed opinions about it. Some people said that they love this yarn, they absolutely adore it, and other people said that it's extremely pilly, kind of difficult to work with. And so for the price I found them for, I thought it was a good idea to try it out for myself. So on each of these, we have 100 grams of yarn, which equates to about 110 yards. And this yarn says to work it up on US 10.5 needles. I'll put the millimeters up on the screen here. So really chunky yarn, all the more reason it's great for some gift knitting or just little accessories and things. And honestly, it was just, if I just want to keep this here as my emotional support yarn. It's so soft. I could just pet it all day. So just thought I would throw that out there as a good little thrift find at $3 a piece. Woohoo! With that, I think that is all I have to share for my knitting this week. This was, in fact, exactly what I needed, was to just sit down and hang out with you all. So I just want to say, and I know I say it all the time, but I just really do appreciate you giving me the opportunity to have this time in this space. I could not be more grateful. And so just thank you as always for being here. I so appreciate it. I hope that you find some time to maybe get outside this week and knit. It's definitely cooling down a little bit here in Connecticut, so I am taking advantage of those chillier evenings outside knitting with a sweater on. Ah, nothing is better. And with all that being said, if you enjoyed this video, I would so appreciate it if you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up. If you subscribe and ring the bell, you're going to be notified anytime I post a new video. However, I do post a podcast video just like this one every Saturday morning at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And with that, a big ol' thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. All right, you guys. Bye.